Let's be honest. Staying calm these days can feel like an Olympic sport. You're stuck in rush hour traffic with a coffee spill on your shirt. Your phone buzzes with that "we need to talk" text, and suddenly your chest tightens. Most people go straight into fight or flight mode, snapping, blaming, or panicking. But imagine this. You're the one person in the room who doesn't flinch. Your voice stays even. Your mind stays clear. The storm rages, but you don't get swept away. That's not a superpower, it's a skill. And the ancient Stoics mastered it over 2,000 years ago. Today, I'm going to share 10 Stoic principles that can help you stay steady no matter what's happening around you. Not with vague theory, but with real-life stories and practical takeaways you can start using today. Lesson 1. Control what you can, release what you can't. I remember one particular morning when I was stuck in traffic on my way to an interview that I had been preparing for over a month. The sun was rising, casting that soft golden light on the windshield, but all I could feel was the pressure mounting in my chest. I kept looking at the time, then back at the sea of cars in front of me. Nothing moved. My mind began spiraling into panic. What if I'm late? What if they think I don't value their time? What if I lose this opportunity entirely? By the time I arrived, I was 20 minutes behind schedule, flustered and sweating through my shirt. I couldn't focus during the conversation. My thoughts were still stuck in that traffic jam, and honestly, I think the interviewers could sense it. I didn't get the job. I blamed the traffic, the timing, the city, the universe. But what I didn't realize then was that the problem wasn't the traffic. It was how I responded to it. Years later, when I started studying Stoic philosophy, I came across something Epictetus taught: the dichotomy of control. And in one moment, that entire experience snapped into focus. This teaching is deceptively simple but deeply powerful. It says that in life there are only two kinds of things: those we can control and those we can't. It sounds obvious, but the implications are life-changing. What we can control are our own thoughts, decisions, actions, and attitudes. What we can't control are the actions of others, the past, the weather, the economy, or even how someone else feels about us. And yet, most of us spend an incredible amount of time and energy stressing about things we cannot influence, while often neglecting the things that are fully within our reach. Once you start to look at your daily life through this lens, you begin to see how often we hand over our peace of mind to forces outside of us. You wake up to a rude comment online and let it ruin your day. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and you spend the next 20 minutes replaying it in your head. Your boss makes a decision you don't like, and you complain about it endlessly, instead of focusing on how you can adapt. It's not that these things don't matter. It's that your power doesn't lie in changing them. It lies in how you respond. Epictetus gave the example of an archer. You can choose your target, aim carefully, train for years, and take your best shot. But once the arrow leaves your bow, it's at the mercy of the wind, the movement of the target, and other external factors. You don't control the outcome. You only control the effort. So the wise person, the Stoic, focuses on taking the best shot they can and lets go of the rest. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. I once worked with a young woman named Kelly, who was constantly anxious about her coworkers' opinions of her. Every meeting left her drained because she would replay every glance, every comment, wondering if she had said something wrong or looked foolish. One day I asked her, "Can you control what they think?" She paused and admitted, "No." Then I asked, "Can you control how prepared you are for the meeting? How you speak? How you listen?" She nodded, and that's when it clicked. She started focusing only on what she could control: her preparation, her clarity, her professionalism. She became calmer, more confident, and ironically, she became more respected in the office. By releasing what she never had control over to begin with, she gained real power. The problem most people face is not that they want to control too much. It's that they don't know where their control ends. We waste hours trying to rewrite the past, predict the future, or manage the emotions of others. But no amount of worry has ever changed tomorrow. No amount of guilt has ever altered yesterday. What we do have, what we've always had, is this moment, this breath, this choice in front of us. The real beauty of this principle is that it applies to both the little things and the big ones. When you're running late, you can't control the red lights, but you can control whether you speed recklessly or take a breath and drive safely. When you're facing a layoff, you can't control the company's decision, but you can control your attitude, your next move, your preparation. When someone speaks poorly of you, you can't change their words, but you can choose not to let their voice become your own internal dialogue. It's not always easy to accept what's outside your power. There are days when you'll want to fight the tide, to force things into place, to scream at the sky. But that's exactly why Stoicism exists. Not to deny our emotions, but to train our minds to respond with wisdom instead of impulse. The Stoics didn't teach us to be robots. They taught us to be anchored. In the chaos of the world, they wanted us to remember that the storm may rage, but our choices remain our own. If you want to apply this today, try this. The next time you feel anxious or frustrated, stop and ask yourself, is this within my control? If the answer is yes, take action. If the answer is no, practice letting it go. Sometimes it helps to literally say to yourself, this is not mine to carry. It might feel awkward at first, but over time it becomes second nature. And when it does, you'll begin to feel something rare and powerful. Clarity, even in confusion. Peace, even in uncertainty. Control, not over the world, but over yourself. That's the foundation of inner calm. That's the first pillar of a Stoic life. Lesson 2. Accept life's unpredictability. There's something deeply unsettling about realizing you don't have control over how life unfolds. We're taught from a young age to plan, to push, to pursue. Work hard and you'll succeed. Be kind and people will treat you well. Play by the rules and things will go your way. But then life happens. A loved one gets sick. A friend betrays you. A dream job falls through. And suddenly, you're staring into the face of a truth that feels unfair. Some things just happen, no matter what you do. That's where the Stoic idea of acceptance comes in. Not as a last resort, but as a powerful way to live with peace, even when life refuses to play by your script. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, lived with more responsibility and pressure than most of us could imagine. He ruled an empire, led armies into war, dealt with plagues, betrayals, and the loss of his own children. And yet, in his private journal, what we now know as Meditations, he continually returned to one idea: accept what you cannot change. Over and over, he reminded himself that life would bring both joy and pain, success and hardship, and that resisting reality only added unnecessary suffering. To accept, for the Stoics, wasn't to give up. It was to stop arguing with the facts and start responding with wisdom. When I was in college, I had planned everything. I had a clear path mapped out: graduate, land a job at a firm I'd interned with, move to a new city, start the next chapter. But life didn't care about my plan. That company went through a hiring freeze right before I graduated, and the offer I was counting on disappeared. I was devastated. I spent weeks feeling like a failure, replaying every decision, every conversation. But eventually, when I stopped fighting what had already happened, something shifted. I got a job somewhere else. It wasn't what I imagined, but it taught me skills and gave me experiences I never would have had otherwise. Looking back, I see clearly. The suffering didn't come from the job falling through. It came from my refusal to accept it. This is what Marcus Aurelius meant when he said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Life is going to throw curveballs. That's not pessimism, it's just honesty. But when you embrace the idea that change, loss, and difficulty are part of the human experience, you stop treating them like personal failures. You start seeing them as opportunities to grow into someone more resilient, more grounded, more compassionate. Think about the seasons. We don't get angry at the leaves for falling in autumn, or the snow for coming in winter. We understand that nature has its rhythm, its cycles. The Stoics believe that life is the same. People come and go, fortune rises and falls, the body ages, plans unravel. And our peace depends on whether we resist these changes or learn to move with them. There's a kind of freedom that comes when you stop needing things to go a certain way in order to be okay. I once met a man named Robert at a support group I volunteered with. He'd lost his wife to cancer, and he told me something I'll never forget. He said, "I spent a year being angry at the world. Then one day I realized the world wasn't going to change, but I could." He started writing letters to his wife every morning. He began walking his dog through the park instead of sitting in silence at home. He didn't pretend everything was fine, but he accepted what had happened, and in that space, healing began. Acceptance doesn't mean we like everything that happens. It means we stop wishing reality was something else. It means we face what is, not what could have been. And in that space, we find clarity. We make better decisions because we're not blinded by denial. We're not stuck in the past or clinging to a fantasy version of the present. We are here, grounded and aware. That doesn't mean it's easy. Acceptance takes practice. It often begins with small things. A flight gets delayed, someone interrupts you. A plan changes last minute. These moments are invitations. We can fight them, stew in frustration, or we can take a breath and say, "This is the situation. How do I want to respond?" That simple pause changes everything. It moves us from reaction to reflection. And the more we practice on the small things, the more prepared we are for the big ones. I'll be honest. There are still moments when I want to resist. When something unfair happens and I catch myself thinking, "This shouldn't be like this." But then I remember what the Stoics taught. Reality doesn't ask for your approval. It simply is. And the faster you can align yourself with what is, the more energy you have to deal with it constructively. Not everything that happens is good, but everything can be accepted. In fact, some of the strongest people I know are not those who had the easiest lives, but those who stopped wasting time resenting what happened to them. They learned to carry it with grace, not bitterness. They stopped asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What now?" Acceptance, in the Stoic sense, is not weakness. It's not passive. It's one of the most courageous things you can do, because it means letting go of control, not just of the outcome, but of the story you told yourself about how things were supposed to go. It means standing in the present, even when the ground has shifted beneath your feet, and saying, "I will not fall apart. I will move forward from here." So the next time life hits you with something unexpected, an argument, a delay, a disappointment, ask yourself, "Can I change this?" If the answer is no, then try this. Breathe, accept, and shift your focus to what you can do. That shift is where the Stoic power lives, not in shaping the world, but in shaping your response to it. And that truly is how peace begins. Lesson 3. Stay in the present. It's strange how much of life we miss, simply because we're not really present for it. We're there physically. Seneca, one of the great Roman Stoics, didn't use the word mindfulness, but everything he taught pointed toward it. He warned that people often waste their lives because they are too distracted to notice they're living them. Being mindful doesn't mean sitting cross-legged in silence all day. It means being fully aware of what you're doing while you're doing it. If you're eating, eat. If you're walking, walk. If you're talking to someone, be fully there with them. I remember a phase in my life when I was constantly rushing. I'd wake up already thinking about the email. The Stoics understood this well. They believed the present moment is the only time we ever truly own. The past is memory. The future is imagination. But right now. And here's the thing. Mindfulness doesn't just bring calm, it brings clarity. When your mind is fully in the present, you see things as they are. I once knew a man named Charles who was recovering from burnout. He'd worked non-stop for years. Of course, mindfulness isn't always easy. The mind loves to wander. You'll sit in silence and suddenly remember a conversation from 3. You can begin right now, wherever you are. Take a breath and notice the air moving through your nose. The Stoics taught that we should treat each day as a complete life. That means showing up for it fully, not rushing through it on autopilot. Because here's the truth. Your life isn't made up of big dramatic events. It's made up of thousands of little moments. Tying your shoes, greeting your neighbor, feeling the sun on your face, hearing your child laugh, taking that first sip of coffee. If you're not paying attention, those moments slip past without leaving a trace. But if you are present, even the smallest details become a kind of quiet miracle. Mindfulness is not about escaping the world. It's about finally arriving in it. The more you practice, the more time seems to slow down. Not because the world changes, but because you do. You stop racing ahead. You stop dragging yesterday behind you. You just live, fully, honestly, and with presence. That's what the Stoics wanted for us. Not a perfect life, but a conscious one. A life where we stop missing what's right in front of us because we're too busy chasing shadows. So pause today, even if it's just for a moment. Look around, breathe, and remember, you're already here. Lesson 4. Build resilience through challenges. There's a quiet strength in people who don't crumble when life gets hard. You've probably met someone like that. Someone who's been through serious storms. Yet they walk with a kind of grounded calm. They don't lash out. They don't collapse into despair. They just keep going. That quality is called resilience. And for the Stoics, it wasn't a bonus trait. It was essential to living well. Life, they believed, is filled with challenges. But those challenges aren't just random punishments. They're opportunities to shape your character. The goal of Stoicism isn't to avoid hardship. It's to build yourself into the kind of person who can face hardship without losing your inner peace. Epictetus knew all about difficulty. He was born into slavery. His body was broken. He walked with a limp for most of his life, likely from being beaten. And yet, he became one of the most respected philosophers in history. Why? Because he refused to let pain or injustice define him. He saw adversity as a kind of training ground, a place where he could test and strengthen the only thing that truly belonged to him, his mind. He said, "Difficulties are things that show what men are. Therefore, when a difficult crisis meets you, remember that you are as the raw material for the process of a statue." In other words, suffering isn't there to break you, it's there to form you, like a sculptor carving stone. I remember a friend named Amanda who went through a brutal divorce after 12 years of marriage. She didn't see it coming, and for a while, it knocked the wind out of her. But one day, she told me something I'll never forget. She said, "I realized that I could either stay broken or I could rebuild, and I chose to rebuild." She didn't pretend everything was fine. She didn't rush the healing, but she made a plan. She joined a support group. She started journaling. She went back to school part-time. And slowly, piece by piece, she built a new life, not in spite of the pain, but with the pain as part of her story. That's resilience. The Stoics believe that we are not harmed by events themselves, but by our judgments about those events. Think about that for a second. The same situation can crush one person and strengthen another, not because the situation is different, but because their interpretation is. Let's say two people lose their job on the same day. One spirals into panic, feels like a failure, and gives up. The other takes a day to feel the sting, then starts updating their resume, calling contacts, learning new skills. What's the difference? Not intelligence, not luck, just mindset. The Stoics trained themselves to meet adversity with curiosity. Not why is this happening to me, but what can I learn from this? How can I grow through this? This isn't about pretending everything is fine when it isn't. It's not about toxic positivity or suppressing pain. It's about developing the strength to face reality without flinching, to feel pain without being defined by it, to be shaken but not shattered. And that kind of strength doesn't just show up overnight. It's built slowly, over time, by how you respond to life's daily struggles. Missed trains, harsh words, lost opportunities, they're all practice. They're small storms preparing you for the bigger ones. And if you meet those moments with patience and perspective, you grow tougher without growing colder. I once heard someone say, "You don't rise to the level of your expectations. You fall to the level of your preparation." That stuck with me, because that's exactly what the Stoics understood. Resilience isn't something you call on only when disaster strikes. It's something you build every day, in small decisions, like choosing to stay calm when you're provoked, like showing up to do the work even when no one's watching, like refusing to complain when things don't go your way. Every one of those moments is a brick in the foundation of your inner strength. Seneca, another great Stoic, often reminded himself that hardships are not misfortunes. They're part of the natural order. He said,
"Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body."
It's such a simple truth, and yet so easily forgotten. Think about your physical body. If you never exercised, your muscles would weaken. You'd get tired easily. You'd feel fragile. Well, the same is true for your mind and your character. If you never face discomfort, you never grow resilient. It's the pressure that builds strength, the resistance that builds power. But here's the good news. Resilience isn't reserved for the tough or the lucky. It's something anyone can cultivate. You don't need a dramatic life story. You just need to show up and do the work. Every time you endure discomfort without quitting, you build it. Every time you hold your values when it's easier not to, you build it. Every time you get knocked down and stand back up, you build it. And one day, you'll face something big, an illness, a betrayal, a major loss. And instead of collapsing, you'll stand a little taller. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because you've trained for this. The Stoics were not interested in theory for theory's sake. They wanted to live better, stronger, more stable lives. And they believed that resilience was not just helpful, it was necessary.
Life will test you. That's not a threat, it's a promise.
But when you meet those tests with courage, acceptance, and discipline, something powerful happens. You stop fearing difficulty. You stop needing life to be easy. You become the kind of person who can handle anything, not because you're unbreakable, but because you've learned how to bend and not snap. Resilience is not loud. It doesn't always look like bravery. Sometimes it looks like showing up quietly. One more day. when it would be easier to disappear. Sometimes it's the decision to try again when no one would blame you for walking away. Sometimes it's simply refusing to be bitter after everything you've been through. And in those quiet acts, the Stoic soul is forged. So the next time life tests you, and it will, pause and ask yourself, what's within my control? How can I respond in a way that strengthens me rather than weakens me? Don't ask for the storm to stop. Ask for the strength to sail through it. That's what the Stoics did, and that's what you can do too. Lesson 5. Your reaction is your power. There's one truth that's easy to forget when life comes at you fast. You always have a choice. You may not get to choose what happens to you, but you do get to choose how you respond. That's where your real power lives, not in changing the weather or other people's opinions or the twists of fate that show up uninvited, but in choosing your next move. The Stoics believed that while we can't control everything outside of us, we can always control what happens inside. That might sound simple, but if you really start living by it, everything changes. Epictetus said it best. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. And those words aren't just poetic, they're practical. They apply to traffic jams and heartbreaks, bad days at work and painful betrayals. Let's be honest, most people go through life reacting on autopilot. Someone insults them, they get angry. They're overlooked for a promotion, they spiral into self-doubt. A plan goes wrong, and they panic. But when you live reactively, you hand over the keys to your inner peace. You let the outside world decide your mood, your mindset, even your behavior. The Stoic path is different. It's about creating space between stimulus and response. Something happens. Maybe it's unfair, maybe it's painful, maybe it's shocking. And instead of reacting immediately, you pause. You breathe. You ask, what is the wise response here? What aligns with my values? What outcome do I want to move toward? That moment of pause is where freedom begins. It's the difference between snapping and speaking with clarity, between burning bridges and building strength. I remember a man I worked with named Dan. He was a project manager at a tech company. Sharp guy, great communicator, but he had a temper. One day, a junior team member made a costly mistake, and Dan exploded in front of everyone. The room fell silent. The employee was humiliated, and the rest of the team pulled back. Afterward, Dan told me he regretted it. He said, "I felt like I couldn't stop myself." That's the illusion, that we're at the mercy of our emotions. But the Stoics would remind Dan and anyone else that between what happens and what we do, there is a moment. And that moment is everything. Learning to choose your response isn't about being emotionless. It's about not being ruled by your emotions. Anger might rise, but you don't have to act on it. Fear might whisper, but you don't have to obey it. You acknowledge the feeling, but you don't let it drive the car. This takes practice, and some days you'll get it wrong. But every time you catch yourself before reacting, you strengthen that muscle. Over time, you become more stable. You stop getting dragged around by every little irritation or setback. Let me give you a simple example. You're in line at the grocery store, and someone cuts in front of you. You have a split second to choose. Lash out, roll your eyes, let it go, or politely speak up. Which choice moves you closer to being the kind of person you want to be? It's not about being passive. It's about being conscious. Stoicism teaches that your dignity is in your hands, and it shows up in how you respond to moments exactly like that. The same goes for emotional challenges. Let's say someone you care about says something that hurts you. You could respond with silence, or with sarcasm, or with an angry text. Or you could pause and say, "That really affected me. Can we talk about it?" That's not weakness, that's strength. You're choosing connection over chaos. And every time you choose your response instead of reacting, you take back control of your life. Marcus Aurelius faced war, betrayal, and the pressure of ruling an empire. Yet his journals are full of reminders to himself to stay steady. "You have power over your mind," he wrote, "not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's not just good advice. It's a way of life. Because when you understand that your reactions are yours to shape, the world becomes a much less frightening place. You don't need it to behave a certain way for you to be okay. We live in a culture that glorifies quick reactions, hot takes, instant tweets, snap judgments. But the Stoics challenge us to slow down, to ask better questions, to respond with intention, not instinct. And that difference between instinct and intention is often the difference between regret and respect. I've learned this the hard way. I've said things in the heat of the moment that I wished I could take back. But I've also had moments when I paused, chose a calmer path, and walked away feeling proud. Those moments are small victories, but they build up, and they start to define who you are. Choosing your response also means refusing to be manipulated. When someone pushes your buttons, it's usually because they want control over your behavior. But if you stay grounded, if you respond with clarity instead of heat, they lose that control. You show them and yourself that you're not here to be puppeteered by emotion. That's not coldness, that's mastery. Of course, it's easier said than done. Some days, your emotions will get the best of you. You'll say things you regret. You'll take things personally that you know you shouldn't. That's okay. The goal isn't perfection. It's awareness. Every time you catch yourself, even a second after the fact, you're improving. And every time you get it right, even once, you build trust with yourself. You start to believe deeply that you are not just a product of circumstance. You are an agent of choice. So the next time you feel yourself about to snap or shut down or give in to fear, pause, just for a breath. Ask yourself, what response would I be proud of later? What does this situation need from me? Not just emotionally, but wisely. That moment of pause is your power, and it's a power no one can take from you. That's the Stoic response. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. Lesson 6. Limit desires. Find freedom. We live in a world that constantly whispers more. More money, more likes, more success, more stuff. You scroll through your phone and see people showing off their vacations, their homes, their perfect lives. And suddenly what you have doesn't feel like enough. That quiet cup of coffee you were enjoying a minute ago now feels boring. That perfectly fine car now looks outdated. Your apartment, your clothes, your body, none of it seems to measure up. That's the trap of desire, and the Stoics saw it coming a long time ago. Seneca warned that excessive desire is one of the greatest threats to inner peace. It's not that wanting things is wrong, it's that when we want too much, we give our happiness away. We tie it to things outside ourselves, things we often can't control. And once our peace depends on something external, on a job title, a luxury item, or someone's approval, we've already lost. Because even if we get what we want, we'll soon want something else. Desire feeds on itself. It grows faster than we can satisfy it. It becomes a hunger with no end. Think about this. How many times have you wanted something badly, finally gotten it, and then found that the satisfaction didn't last? Maybe it was a new phone, or a raise, or even recognition from someone you admire. For a moment, it felt great, but soon enough your mind moved on to the next thing. That's not because you're broken. It's because unchecked desire is never satisfied. The Stoics understood this deeply. They believed that the more you multiply your desires, the more you multiply your disappointments. I once had a colleague named Brandon who made great money, drove a luxury car, and had the kind of job people envy. But he was always restless, always upgrading, always chasing the next big thing. One day I asked him if he was happy. He laughed and said, "Not yet, but I'm close." That was 5 years ago. I bumped into him recently, different job, nicer car, still chasing. That close never arrives when you're caught in that loop. Because the problem isn't the lack of things, it's the never-ending thirst for more. The Stoic solution isn't to live in poverty or reject all comfort. It's to practice temperance, to be able to say, "This is enough," and to mean it. Temperance means setting limits, not because you're afraid of pleasure, but because you understand that freedom doesn't come from satisfying every craving. It comes from mastering them. The man who can enjoy a simple meal without needing it to be fancy, who can wear ordinary clothes and still feel confident, who doesn't need constant novelty to feel alive. That man is rich in a way money can't touch. Seneca said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, who is poor." That quote hit me hard the first time I read it, because it made me realize that poverty isn't just a financial state, it's a mindset. A mind that's never content is always in a state of lack, no matter how full the bank account is. And the reverse is true too. A person with modest means, who genuinely appreciates what they have, lives in abundance. One thing the Stoics often did, and this might surprise you, is they practiced voluntary discomfort. They would sleep on the floor, eat plain food, wear rough clothes, not as punishment, but as training. They were reminding themselves that they could live with less, that if life ever took away the comforts they enjoyed, they would still be okay. It's a powerful practice because it removes fear. You stop being terrified of losing things when you realize you don't need them to survive or to be happy. That kind of inner security, it's priceless. You don't need to give everything up to start applying this. You can start by noticing. The next time you feel that wave of, "I need this," pause and ask, "Do I really? Is this a true need or just a want dressed up as one? Will this add meaning to my life or just a quick hit of pleasure that fades?" That simple pause, that space between desire and decision, is where you start regaining control. Another practice is gratitude. It sounds simple, but it's revolutionary. When you take time every day to notice what you already have, the grip of desire starts to loosen. You begin to see that you're not lacking. You're actually surrounded by more than enough. A roof over your head, food in your belly, people who care about you, a moment of silence, a body that breathes and moves. These things, which are so easy to overlook, are the foundation of a good life. The Stoics weren't trying to shame people for wanting things. They were simply asking, at what cost? If your peace depends on getting what you want, then what happens when you don't? If your identity is built on status or possessions, what happens when they fade? They wanted us to build our happiness on something sturdier, on character, wisdom, and inner freedom, things that can't be taken away by bad luck or the passage of time. I'll be honest, this lesson still challenges me. I'm human. I like nice things. I enjoy recognition. I have dreams and ambitions. But I try to remember that none of those things make me whole. I already am. And if I can keep desire in check, if I can remind myself of what truly matters, then I stay grounded. I stay calm, even when life doesn't go exactly as planned. At the end of the day, Stoicism doesn't tell us to stop dreaming. It just asks us to dream wisely, to want the right things, to want less but better. Peace over perfection, meaning over image, growth over indulgence. Because the less we need, the more we're free to simply live. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by wants, if your mind keeps telling you that happiness is just one more purchase, one more milestone, one more like away, pause, breathe, and remember what the Stoics knew. Happiness isn't in having more, it's in needing less. Lesson 7. Live by virtue, not by impulse. If you ask most people what they want out of life, you'll hear things like happiness, success, peace, or love. But the Stoics believed that all of those things, real, lasting versions of them, flow from one source: virtue. That's a word we don't hear much anymore. It sounds old-fashioned, maybe even moralistic. But for the Stoics, virtue didn't mean being perfect or self-righteous. It meant living with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control. It meant being the kind of person who does what's right, not because it's easy, but because it's right. They believed that living virtuously is the only true path to inner peace. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Just that you do the right thing. The rest doesn't matter." He ruled an empire, led armies into battle, and dealt with enormous pressure. But when you read his private writings, you see what mattered most to him wasn't power or reputation. It was integrity. He constantly reminded himself to stay humble, to stay kind, and to stay focused on what was in his control, his own character. In today's world, that kind of mindset is rare. We're encouraged to chase outcomes, get more likes, more money, more recognition. And it's easy to lose ourselves in the process, to cut corners, to compromise our values, to act from fear or ego instead of principle. But the Stoics challenge us to take a different path, not the easy one, but the solid one, the one that allows us to go to sleep at night without regret, the one where your peace isn't tied to what happens around you, but to who you are inside. Let's talk about the 4 core virtues the Stoics lived by. The first is wisdom, not just intelligence, but the ability to see clearly, to think carefully, to make decisions based on reason instead of impulse. Wisdom means stepping back before you speak, questioning your assumptions, and choosing the long-term good over the short-term fix. It's the ability to say, "This feels good right now, but is it right?" Or, "I'm angry, but is my judgment clouded?" Wisdom is what helps you see past emotion and ego and make choices you won't regret later. Then there's courage. Not just battlefield bravery, but the everyday kind. The courage to speak up when it's unpopular. The courage to be honest when lying would be easier. The courage to keep showing up when you feel like quitting. Courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you act anyway, guided by your values instead of your fears. Seneca once said, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage." And if you've ever pushed through grief, anxiety, rejection, or failure, you know that's true. Next is justice. And for the Stoics, justice wasn't just about laws or punishment. It was about fairness, about treating people with respect, whether they're above you, below you, or beside you. It was about doing right by others even when you don't benefit. That means keeping your word, owning your mistakes, standing up for someone who's being mistreated. Justice is about remembering that we're all part of the same human family, and how you treat others is a reflection of who you are, not who they are. And finally, temperance. That's the virtue of balance, of self-restraint. It's what helps you say, "That's enough," in a world that constantly screams, "More." It's the ability to enjoy something without becoming dependent on it, to feel anger without being consumed by it, to feel pleasure without chasing it at all costs. Temperance doesn't mean denying yourself joy. It means not letting joy turn into addiction. It's what keeps you centered when everything around you is pushing you off course. When you put these four virtues together, wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, you get a life that's grounded, a life that holds up under pressure. You still face challenges, but you don't lose yourself in them. You still feel pain, but you respond with strength and clarity. And most importantly, you live in a way that earns your own respect. That's something the world can't give you, and it can't take it away either. I once knew a man named Joseph who ran a small auto repair shop. He didn't have a flashy life, no luxury car, no big social media following. But he had a reputation. People trusted him. When someone couldn't afford a repair, he'd work out a payment plan. When a supplier made a mistake, he didn't explode. He fixed the issue calmly. He showed up early. He treated his workers fairly. And you could see it in their faces. They respected him. They worked harder because they believed in him. One day I asked him what his secret was, and he said, "I just try to do right by people, even when nobody's looking." That's Stoicism in action. That's virtue. Here's the thing. Virtue isn't glamorous. It doesn't always feel good in the moment. Sometimes it means admitting you were wrong. Sometimes it means staying quiet when you could gloat. Sometimes it means choosing the harder road, the slower win, the invisible reward. But it builds something solid inside you, something unshakable. You might not always win by the world's standards, but you'll win something far more important: your own peace of mind. We all slip up. We all fall short. That's human. The goal of Stoicism isn't to be perfect. It's to keep coming back to your values. To keep asking, what kind of person do I want to be? And then living like you mean it. The more you align your actions with your principles, the lighter you feel. And when you stumble, you don't spiral. You reflect, you learn, you realign. So the next time you face a decision, big or small, ask yourself, what would the wise choice be? What would the courageous choice be? What would justice ask of me here? Am I acting with balance or from excess? You don't need anyone else to approve of your answers. If you can look yourself in the mirror and say, I lived by my values today, then you've succeeded in the only way that really matters. Virtue isn't old-fashioned. It's timeless. And in a world full of noise, distraction, and temptation, it's what will keep you grounded, focused, and free. Lesson 8. Remember, nothing lasts forever. Everything changes. That's one of the simplest truths in life, and also one of the hardest to accept. We all know it on some level. Seasons change, people grow old, moments pass. But when something good enters our lives, we want to hold on to it forever. And when something bad shows up, we want it gone immediately. The Stoics taught us to look at this constant flow of change not as something to fear, but as something to understand, something that can actually free us from unnecessary suffering. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly that everything in life is temporary, fleeting, and in motion. Not to make himself sad, but to sharpen his perspective and stay grounded in what really matters. There's a passage in his Meditations where he reflects on the idea that even the emperors who came before him, the ones who were once so powerful and revered, are now just names carved into stone. Time has washed over them like waves over sand. And if their lives passed in a blink, so will his, so will yours, so will mine. But instead of being overwhelmed by that thought, Marcus used it to live more fully. If something is temporary, it becomes more precious, not less. Like a sunset or the final note of a beautiful song, its value comes from the fact that it won't last forever. We tend to cling to things: relationships, titles, routines, youth, comfort. And when those things shift or disappear, we suffer. Not always because the loss itself is unbearable, but because we never prepared our minds for change. The Stoics didn't deny the pain of loss, but they saw that much of our misery comes from resisting what's inevitable. They trained themselves daily to reflect on the nature of impermanence, so that when change arrived, as it always does, they could face it with grace, not shock. I remember when my grandfather passed away. He was strong, kind, a steady presence in my life. When he died, I felt the world go quiet. I kept thinking, he was just here. One day we were talking, laughing over coffee, and then he was gone. For weeks, I kept playing our last conversation in my head, trying to hold on to something I could never get back. And then one morning I remembered something I'd read from the Stoics. Don't grieve as if you've lost someone forever. Be grateful that you ever had them at all. That didn't erase the grief, but it changed it. I started seeing his memory as a gift, not a wound. I started appreciating the time we did have, instead of only mourning the time we wouldn't. Everything you love will eventually change or fade or end. That sounds harsh, but it's not meant to be cruel. It's meant to wake you up. When you know that your children will grow up, you treasure their laughter now. When you know your health might someday fade, you cherish the days when your body feels strong. When you realize your time with someone is limited, you stop taking them for granted. Impermanence doesn't destroy meaning, it creates it. And the same goes for difficult times. Pain doesn't last forever either. No emotion, no circumstance, no struggle stays frozen in time. You've probably lived through things you thought would break you. And yet here you are. That too is the lesson of transience. That we can endure. That the worst things will pass, just as surely as the best ones. And when we stop clinging and start flowing, we suffer less. We ride the waves instead of drowning in them. The Stoics use this awareness to stay humble in good times and calm in bad ones. If something wonderful happened, they'd remind themselves, this too shall pass. Not to ruin the joy, but to avoid becoming attached. And when tragedy came, they'd say the same thing. This too shall pass. They understood that both pleasure and pain are visitors, not permanent residents. I knew a woman named Elise who ran a small bookstore. One year, a huge chain opened across the street. Business dropped by half. Her regulars drifted away. For a while, she was bitter. She blamed the market, the customers, the changing world. But then she let go of what used to be. She accepted that the business would have to change. She started hosting small book clubs, inviting local authors, focusing on personal connection instead of competition. Slowly, her store became something different, but something better. She told me later, I stopped trying to keep things the same. That's when everything started to work. That's the beauty of understanding impermanence. It opens the door to transformation. When we stop clinging to how things used to be, we make space for what they can become. We stop living in fear of change and start learning from it. Instead of asking, why can't this last forever? We start asking, what can I learn while it's here? It's also a powerful antidote to ego. When we remember that we're temporary, we stop obsessing over status, reputation, or being right all the time. We stop needing to win every argument or prove our worth through titles. We start focusing on character, on how we treat people, how we show up, how we live. Because that's what endures. The impact you make, the kindness you offer, the courage you show. These things leave ripples that last longer than anything carved in stone. So the next time you're holding on to something too tightly, a relationship, a routine, a version of yourself that no longer fits, pause and remember this. Everything changes, and that's okay. Letting go isn't loss, it's life. The more you resist change, the more you suffer. But when you accept it, you move through life with clarity and calm. The Stoics weren't trying to make us indifferent. They were trying to make us aware. Aware that this moment, this breath, is all we ever truly have. So don't waste it chasing permanence. Don't wait for everything to stay the same. Instead, love what's in front of you, now. Show up fully, now. Because soon, like everything else, it will pass. And that is what makes it beautiful. Lesson 9. Practice daily gratitude. There's a habit I started a few years ago that changed the way I see everything. It wasn't dramatic or complicated. It wasn't even new. I just started writing down 3 things I was grateful for every night before bed. Some days it was easy. Good conversation with an old friend. A really solid cup of coffee. Getting through a hard meeting without losing my temper. Other days it felt impossible. On the days when everything went wrong, when I was tired, frustrated, or in pain, my mind didn't want to cooperate. But even then, I forced myself to find something, anything, to be grateful for. And the more I practiced, the more I realized something the Stoics had been saying all along. Gratitude isn't just a nice idea. It's a mindset that shifts everything. Seneca said, "Nothing is more honorable than a grateful heart." And that's not just poetic, it's practical. Gratitude trains your mind to focus on what's present, not what's missing. It pulls your attention away from comparison, resentment, and entitlement, and places it gently on what is. It doesn't deny difficulty. It doesn't pretend pain doesn't exist. It simply says, yes, this is hard, but here's what I still have. And in that shift, we reclaim a kind of peace that can't be shaken by circumstances. In today's world, gratitude isn't natural. We're constantly bombarded with messages telling us we need more to be happy. More money, more followers, more success. And when we're always reaching for the next thing, we stop seeing the value of what's already in our hands. That's when bitterness creeps in. That's when we start asking, why don't I have what they have? Instead of asking, what have I been overlooking in my own life? The Stoics saw this clearly. They believed that true wealth wasn't measured in coins or property, but in perspective. A man who appreciates little lives in abundance. A man who needs everything lives in poverty, even if he owns half the world. Gratitude to the Stoics was an act of discipline. It was a form of strength, not softness, because it meant taking control of your focus. And where your focus goes, your emotions follow. I once met a woman named Clara at a local community center where I used to volunteer. She'd lost her husband to cancer, was living on a small pension, and walked with a cane after surgery. And yet, she radiated this calm joy. I asked her once how she stayed so positive. She smiled and said, "Every morning, I thank God I woke up. Every night, I thank Him for anything that didn't hurt." It made me laugh, but it also made me think. She wasn't living an easy life, but she was living a grateful one. And that made all the difference. We often think we'll feel grateful after things get better. After the raise. After the relationship. After we finally arrive. But the Stoics flipped that. They believe that if you learn to be grateful now, in the chaos, in the discomfort, in the uncertainty, then you've already arrived at something better than comfort. You've arrived at freedom. Gratitude doesn't make problems disappear, but it keeps problems from becoming your entire worldview. It gives you context. It helps you zoom out. Yes, you had a tough day at work, but you still have work. Yes, someone disappointed you, but you still have people who love you. Yes, your health is struggling, but you still woke up this morning. Gratitude doesn't ask you to deny the pain. It simply asks you to also see the good. The Stoics also practiced what I call reverse gratitude. They would intentionally reflect on what life would be like without something they valued. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that the people he loved could be gone at any moment. Harsh? Maybe. But it made him treasure his time with them. Seneca said we should rehearse loss, not to make ourselves sad, but to make ourselves more present. If you knew this was your last day with someone you care about, would you treat them differently? If you knew this was the last time you walked through your home, or hugged your child, or watched the sunset, would you pay more attention? Gratitude opens our eyes. It slows us down. It says, this moment matters. Even if it's ordinary, even if it's small. Because eventually, you realize the small moments are your life. A quiet evening, a shared meal, a kind word. These are the things we rush past while chasing things that don't last. Gratitude brings us back to what's real, back to what's already enough. It also makes you more resilient. When you're in the habit of noticing what's good, even in hardship, you're less likely to fall apart when things get hard. You've trained your mind to see clearly, not just the darkness, but the light around the edges. That doesn't make you delusional. It makes you strong. Because you don't crumble when life shakes you. You stand in the storm and say, "This hurts, but I still have breath in my lungs. I still have purpose. I still have something to give." The best part is, you don't need anything external to begin. You don't need a new job, or more time, or some huge transformation. You can start today, right now. Just pause and ask, what is one thing I'm grateful for in this moment? Maybe it's your morning coffee. Maybe it's the fact that someone checked in on you this week. Maybe it's that you're still here, still trying, still learning, still breathing. Gratitude is a practice. It's a muscle. It gets stronger the more you use it. And the more you use it, the more you realize that the good life isn't built on always getting more. It's built on learning to see what's already there. So when things feel overwhelming, when your mind is racing with what's missing or unfair or uncertain, take a step back. Look around. Say thank you. Not because everything is perfect, but because gratitude is how you remember what still is. And that, in itself, is a powerful kind of peace. Lesson 10. Keep growing, always. There's something deeply humbling about realizing you'll never be done. No matter how much you know, how much you've experienced, or how many mistakes you've already learned from, there's still more ahead. More to understand, more to unlearn, more to build. The Stoics understood this well. They didn't see growth as something you do in your 20s and finish by midlife. They saw it as a lifelong pursuit, a daily commitment to becoming just a little wiser, a little more composed, a little more aligned with the kind of person you want to be. Epictetus, who began life as a slave and ended up one of history's most respected teachers, said, "No great thing is created suddenly." And he meant that. He saw personal growth not as a one-time decision, but as something you chip away at every day, like carving a sculpture from stone. Every conversation, every mistake, every moment of self-reflection is another opportunity to shape your character into something stronger and more stable. One of the most powerful ideas in Stoicism is that you are always in the process of becoming. You are never fixed. Your past does not define your future unless you allow it to. The person you were 5 years ago may have had different habits, beliefs, and blind spots. But so what? You're not that person anymore. And you won't be the same person 5 years from now either, if you keep choosing to grow. But growth doesn't just happen. It has to be chosen. Every single day, we're presented with moments that ask us, do you want to repeat this pattern or rise above it? That might look like pausing before snapping at someone. It might look like asking for feedback instead of defending yourself. It might mean picking up a book instead of scrolling through your phone. And none of those choices are flashy. No one claps for you when you swallow your pride or sit quietly with your own discomfort. But those are the moments where real growth happens. There's a story I always remember about a friend named Samuel. In his 30s, he was laid off from a job he'd had for over a decade. At first, he was crushed. His identity was wrapped up in that title, that role. But after a few weeks of sitting in silence and frustration, he started doing something different. He began studying philosophy, mostly Stoicism, and journaling about his day, his reactions, his blind spots. He started asking himself, how can I use this time to become better, not just bitter? It wasn't a dramatic transformation. It was slow, steady, but over the course of a year, he rebuilt, not just his career, but his entire approach to life. And it all began the moment he decided to stop waiting for life to change and started changing himself. That's the core of what the Stoics believed. That every hardship, every delay, every disappointment holds the potential for internal development. It's easy to grow when everything is going your way. But what about when life pushes you into unfamiliar territory? What about when your plans fall apart? What about when you feel like giving up? That's where the real work begins. The Stoics didn't seek comfort. They sought clarity. And clarity comes from asking yourself hard questions and being willing to face the answers. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake, I will gladly change. It is the truth I seek, and the truth never harmed anyone." That level of humility, especially coming from a Roman emperor, is rare. But it's also what made him wise. He didn't cling to being right. He didn't pretend to know everything. He kept his mind open because he knew there was always more to learn. That's the mark of real strength. Not stubbornness, but teachability. The world around us changes constantly. Technology shifts. Relationships evolve. Careers take unexpected turns. And if you're not growing, you're falling behind. Not just professionally, but personally. You can't afford to coast. You can't afford to think you've arrived. Because the second you stop learning is the second you stop leading yourself. And learning doesn't always mean going back to school or reading philosophy. Sometimes it means learning how to listen better, learning how to be still, learning how to set boundaries, learning how to forgive. Growth can be loud, like starting a new chapter in life, but it can also be quiet, like choosing not to repeat the same mistake again. The form doesn't matter. What matters is the direction. You grow by showing up, by paying attention, by being honest with yourself, even when it stings. And most importantly, you grow by being patient. We live in a world that glorifies instant results, but the Stoics knew that inner transformation takes time. You're not going to be perfectly wise, calm, or virtuous tomorrow. You might not even be close. But that doesn't mean you quit. It means you keep showing up and doing the work, one choice at a time. Some days will feel like setbacks. Some seasons will be slow. That's normal. Growth isn't a straight line. It's a cycle of challenge, reflection, and improvement. The key is not to give up when you don't see immediate results. The Stoic mindset is about long-term change. It's about becoming someone you're proud of, not overnight, but over a lifetime. So ask yourself today, what's one area where I can grow? Maybe it's your patience, maybe it's your discipline, maybe it's how you treat people. Don't try to fix everything at once, just start with one thing, one shift, one decision to do better than yesterday. Over time, those small steps add up to something powerful. Keep learning, keep growing. Not because you're not enough, but because becoming better is the most meaningful project you'll ever work on. Your job isn't to be perfect, it's to be committed, to be willing, to be honest. The rest will follow. When you look back, months or years from now, you'll see it. Not all at once, but in who you've become. Wiser, calmer, stronger. Not because life got easier, but because you chose to grow through it. That's the Stoic path. And it never ends. That's what makes it worth walking. Closing reflection. The Stoics didn't promise a life without storms. They promised the skills to stand in the rain without losing your footing. Control what you can, accept what you can't, stay present, use challenges as fuel, choose your responses, simplify your wants, live by virtue, embrace change, practice gratitude, and never stop growing. The world will always be noisy, but with these 10 principles, you can carry your calm with you wherever you go.